From the Digital Media Center, on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate-level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. Ramping Up Your English is for English language learners from all language backgrounds who have already begun the process of learning English as their second language. It's a program for people of all ages. If you're seeking greater English proficiency, this program is designed to help you reach that goal. Ramping Up Your English is a support program for English learners who have already passed the beginning stages of learning English. We take a content-based approach to helping you reach higher English proficiency. We use English to teach English. The theme of our first unit is trains and railroads. This is episode 16, segment 1. In episode 15, we finished our journey on Amtrak's Coast Starlight train. The Coast Starlight is considered by many to be the most scenic train of the Amtrak system. Today we board another train that many consider a rival when it comes to the incredible western landscape. Let's all get aboard the world-renowned California Zephyr. Painted up in anniversary colors, a locomotive pulls Amtrak's California Zephyr into Sacramento Station. We'll soon be aboard for one of the most scenic and famous trains in the United States. We'll start in San Francisco and trace the Continental Railroad in reverse, as my wife Liz and I did twice. We'll cross the Sierra Nevada mountains to Reno, then travel through the mountains of Utah and Colorado. This is where the California Zephyr offers the most spectacular scenery. We'll rumble across the Great Plains and cross the Mississippi River at Omaha. Then we'll continue on to Chicago, where the California Zephyr terminates, or begins, depending on which direction you're going. Pulling out of Sacramento, we soon cross the American River. On this early segment, we had historic interpretation from a volunteer of Sacramento's Railroad Museum.
Today, we will be traveling over one of the most scenic railroad routes in the United States. It is also the western end of our nation's first Transcontinental Railroad.
We climbed and climbed until that river we crossed was just a distant ribbon of water.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cape Horn. This promontory overlooks the North Fork of the American River, which is visible below from the right side of the train. At this point, the river is about 1,800 feet below us. Early day passenger trains stopped here, and the riders was invited to detrain and enjoy the spectacular view. By the way, this is the same river we crossed as we departed Sacramento.
We are on the California Zephyr. We've just crossed the area where the gold fields were back that started the 1849 gold rush, and now we're in the Sierra Nevada. We'll be going near Donner Pass, and we'll end up near Truckee before the day's over. It wasn't long before we started seeing snow up here, and it wasn't long before we enjoyed eating lunch in the dining car. The Sierra Nevada mountains were a major obstacle for the Central Pacific Railroad, building eastward to meet the Union Pacific. The dangerous back-breaking work was of no interest to white laborers, so Chinese work gangs were employed to blast a trail through the mountains. The Chinese workers proved strong and dependable. Without them, there would have been no Transcontinental Railroad at that time. They found that they could only trust each other when setting off dynamite to blast tunnels from hard rock. The California Zephyr passes through many of these tunnels through the Sierra Nevada mountains. The California Zephyr passes above Donner Lake, named for the infamous event in the history of the Oregon-California Trail. In a classic example of you shouldn't ignore people when they know what they're talking about, the Donner Party got trapped in these mountains during the winter and soon had nothing to eat but each other. Descending from Donner Pass, the California Zephyr passes a freight train waiting on a siding. Following the Truckee River, we emerged from the mountains to a much drier landscape. We saw lots of desert in the state of Nevada. It's here we ended our first day on the California Zephyr and anticipated what the rising sun would show us on the following morning. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. We're learning English while enjoying video about trains. But how do you get on a train like this? We'll look at some useful English functions when we return. This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. After American Railroad's golden age, thousands of miles of track were abandoned. Rather than see these valuable transportation corridors disappear, an organization called Rails to Trails turns them into trails for bicycling, hiking, and sometimes horseback riding. Members get to see good work that's being done by enjoying the organization's magazine. Each issue features rail trails throughout the country, as well as maps that can help them enjoy them. There are always interesting features like this one on railroad trestles. If you want to receive the magazine, you must become a member. I bought my first copy from a group that supports libraries, but I soon became a member myself to support their important work. Millions of people are enjoying healthy lives by getting outside and using these trails. And if you need something to feel good about, you can always enjoy a Rails to Trails magazine. You can contact Rails to Trails at railstotrails.org. You may never get to drive a train, but you can enjoy hiking and biking where the trains used to pass. For Ramping Up Your English, I'm John Letts. Coming soon to Ramping Up Your English, Amtrak's Cardinal train takes viewers to Washington, D.C. We visit an Oregon congressman and get a tour of the U.S. Capitol. A congressional staff member takes us through all kinds of passageways and escalators on our way to the main part of the U.S. Capitol. We'll see the Capitol Dome, what's inside that dome that's so iconic of the U.S. Capitol, the legislative body of the United States government. Moving from the legislative branch, we take a quick glimpse of the judicial branch, the U.S. Supreme Court. See the Supreme Court building getting a facelift. We were in Washington during Congress's sequester, so there wasn't a lot of touring going on, including at the White House, where tours had been canceled. At least we got this exterior view of the greatest symbol of the executive branch of the United States. Here's the White House from the street. This is the north entrance of the White House, as seen from Lafayette Park. A Marine stands guard at the west wing. While we were on our way to the White House, we encountered this spontaneous crowd waiting for, well, it became obvious as events unfolded. Here was President Obama's motorcade as he was returning from a trip to Miami, heading toward the White House. This trip to Washington will be featured soon on Ramping Up Your English. Back to Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English learners. You can watch and download this program and others by visiting archive.org/details/RogueTV. Choose Ramping Up Your English from the sidebar or choose my name, John Letts. You can see this program on Channel 15 in Ashland and Channel 182 on Charter Cable. This is Episode 16, Segment 2. In Episode 14, we practice using a schedule, also called a timetable, to plan a rail trip, make a reservation, buy a ticket, and catch the train. Today, let's look at some words that sometimes give trouble to intermediate level English learners. The words to consider are the words should and must. These words are similar, but they are also different enough that mistaking one for the other could leave you on a train platform watching the train leave the station without you. The word should is a word of advice and shouldn't be used as a warning, although it sometimes is. Should is also a word of judgment, which means it needs to be used carefully. In a practical sense, the word should tells someone about the best action that would take place in a certain situation. You might, for example, have made reservations ahead of time and someone says, you should do that. Well, the person giving this advice is not saying you can't get on the train without doing this. They probably see an advantage to booking early and they want you to have that advantage. Another example would be, you should use your smartphone app to get a ticket. Well, that doesn't mean that's the only way to get a ticket. It just means it's the way they prefer. Now, be warned that some people use the word should when they mean must. If you hear that you should bring proof of ID when checking in for the train, you could be disappointed when you find that you can't board the train without it. Must would have been the correct word to use there. This is when it helps to have a high enough English proficiency to ask clarifying questions. Now, some people are sensitive about being told they should do something. That communication could be interpreted as judgment of the way someone does something. If you want to explore the platform, for example, you might not appreciate your travel companion telling you that you should sit on the bench instead. If you want to tell someone they should do something, you can do it in a softer way by saying, for example, you might want to sit on the bench before all those people get here. We'll be waiting at least a half an hour. Well, no judgment there, just friendly advice. You could also begin that thought with the words, I suggest. I have to admit I don't like the word should and I rarely use it. When I first taught 5th grade, I was told that my students should already know their multiplication facts. That was not helpful because most of them did not know them. So when I was told you should not spend time teaching them the facts, well, that was ridiculous. It didn't matter if they should have known them. They didn't, and therefore needed to be taught. What's worse is telling someone they should have done something. That often is taken as judgment on what they've already done and can't undo. It's a lot smoother to say, next time you might want to do this a little differently. Or just let it go and have faith that people can learn from their experiences. Now, what I've just said about the judgmental use of should is an example of a tirade. When someone goes on and on about something that they dislike, that's called a tirade in English. Now, getting back on track, there's a difference between the word should and the word must. The word must is not used to give advice or to judge someone's actions. Must should be a clear statement of fact. An obvious one is, you must arrive at the station before the train leaves. That's not an opinion, it's a fact. A matter of cause and effect. Arriving at the station after the train leaves will result in your missing the train. Now, this chart shows some actions related to train travel, and let's see which one goes with the word should and which one with the word must. Okay, so we should or must buy a ticket to ride. What do you think? The answer is must. It's not just advice. You have to have that ticket. Let's look at the second one. You should or must take a taxi to the train station. Well, that's advice. There's different ways of getting to the train station, so that should be the word should. And the third one, people should or must make a reservation on long-distance train. Well, as a matter of fact, it is a must. The long-distance trains require reservations. Let's do a few more of these. I should or must travel in a sleeping car. Well, you don't ever have to travel in a sleeping car, so that would be the word should. We should or must eat in the dining room. What do you think? No, that's a should. Okay. You should or must tip the car attendant. Well, the fact that you're talking about a tip tells you that's a should and not a must. You should or must have legal ID to board the train. Well, that's a must. That's a requirement. We have some more. You should or must travel with only one bag. Well, if that were true, if that were part of their policy, that would be a must, but right now it's a should. You can travel with more than one bag on Amtrak. We should or must get to know the name of our car attendant. That's very good advice, but it's not a must. You don't have to know the name, so should goes there. And people should follow instructions from uniformed train employees, or people must follow instructions. Well, you'll find out soon enough if you don't, because that's a must. They can actually make you leave the train. So, for example, let's look at some more. Passengers should or must not smoke on the train. Well, these days that is a must, and I have heard of people being thrown off the train for smoking on the train, so that's a must. You should or must travel with a map of your route. It's a great thing to do that, but that's a should, not a must. Okay, I'm going to pause a little bit longer here. Passengers should or must board the train before it leaves the station. I think you can figure that one out, but just in case, that's a must. Okay, one more word about should and must. Using the words ought to is the same as saying should. And for the word must, using the words have to is another way of saying must. Practice the same prompts we just did, but this time use the words ought to and have to. You'll find these sentence stems on my website. Visit letscreate.org and go to the episode 16 page. Do this as your homework if you want to get really good at this. I suggest putting this in your notebook. Also, come up with your own list of things that you should and must do. We'll take a look after a break here. This is it for segment 2. We'll be back with segment 3 right after this. This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. If you want to go back in time to the very birth of trains and railroads, you want to read the book The History of Railways by Colin Heinsohn from Scholastic Books. The book's format reminds me of eyewitness books with small illustrations and ample text. English learners will find that the text is very challenging and there's a lot of text on each page. The illustrations are clear, providing the context to help readers decipher the text. Historical photos depict important events like the Golden Spikes ceremony that joined the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads as America's first intercontinental railroad. There's a great amount of information in the history of railways. Readers will stretch their English reading skills, but you'll also be rewarded by a deeper knowledge of trains and railroads. Meanwhile, you'll be ramping up your English proficiency, especially in reading. For Ramping Up Your English, I'm John Letts. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English, a support program for English learners who want to increase their level of English proficiency. If that's you, you're in the right place. This is episode 16, segment 3. In the previous episode, we worked with the words should and must to distinguish between giving advice and giving a warning. We also learned that using the words ought to means the same as should, and using the words have to means the same as must. Your homework is to use these alternative words to complete the same sentences we did in the last segment. You'll find what you need on my website, letscreate.org. Just go to the episode 16 page and scroll down. Do you recognize what this is? It's a small segment of a rail that the surface on which the train wheels travel. This lower part is attached to the cross pieces called railroad ties with spikes like this. The ties are usually made of wood in the shape of a rectangular prism laid perpendicular to the rails. Those who built the railroads used hammers with long handles to drive in these spikes. The upper part is what holds the wheels on the track. It's the part that's in contact with the train's wheels. The video clip you just saw is the first segment of today's program featuring the California Zephyr leaving California and traveling east through the Sierra Nevada mountains. That's the section of the Transcontinental Railroad built by Central Pacific Railroad to meet up with the Union Pacific in Promontory, Utah. To learn more about the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, I suggest watching episode 3. There's a lot of history there about the building of America's first transcontinental railroad. The owners of the Central Pacific later built the Southern Pacific, a railroad that dominated California and much of the Southwest and part of the South. Today, the California Zephyr travels this section of the Transcontinental Railroad. Southern Pacific operated the transcontinental route, known as the Overland Route, in cooperation with Union Pacific, making it possible for passengers to reach San Francisco from Chicago on trains called the City of San Francisco and others. However, the world-renowned California Zephyr was not run by either Southern Pacific or Union Pacific. The California Zephyr was operated by 3 railroad companies. From Chicago, it was operated by the Burlington Railroad. From Denver, it was operated by the Rio Grande Railroad. And the final section of the route was operated by Western Pacific. The railroad celebrated on this cup. The operators of the California Zephyr were determined to compete with Southern Pacific with both freight and passenger trains. Western Pacific approached the San Francisco Bay Area on a famous route called the Feather River Canyon. This route today is a passion for rail fans due to its unique and picturesque engineering. The Western Pacific incorporates a feather in its logo to identify with this engineering accomplishment. The Feather River Canyon serves only freight trains today, with the exception of some excursion railroad trips. This shows the Western Pacific pulling the dome cars of the California Zephyr, as it did on the third leg of that trip from Chicago. Here's a close-up of one of those dome cars on the California Zephyr. Some of these cars are still rolling on the rails as private cars pulled behind Amtrak trains. It's a good time now for you to do an informal assessment of how much of this program you understood today. Write down about what percentage of the program you understood in your notebook. An example might be that you understood 80% of what you saw and heard. If you understood more or less in the video clip compared to the rest of the program, write that down as well. Be sure to write down the date and the episode number, which is 16. You can repeat the program. Just go to my website, letscreate.org, and find the episode 16 page. Click the link to see this program again. You'll also see a bonus video of the Coast Starlight Southbound, which includes a visit to California's Elkhorn Slough and scenes of gray whales. Well, that's all for segment 3 of episode 16 of Ramping Up Your English. I want to thank my awesome crew who volunteered their time and talents to make this program possible. I want to thank my announcer, Bob Ayers, and I want to thank you, our viewers. See you next time on RVTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/roadtv. Join us next time on RVTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.